The sudden, piercing wail of police sirens cutting through the soft violin music was not part of my dream wedding schedule. I stood under the magnificent floral archway of the outdoor botanical garden, my hands trembling slightly against my crisp, white silk bridal gown as blue and red flashing lights reflected off the glass panels of the reception pavilion. Standing right at the entrance of the aisle, holding a glass of champagne with a wild, chaotic look in his eyes, was my bitter millionaire ex-fiancé, Julian. He looked at me, then at my groom, David, and let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed across the terrified silence of our 200 sitting guests. "You really thought you could just replace me, Clara?" Julian yelled, stepping forward as two uniformed police officers rapidly closed the distance behind him. "You thought you could build a perfect life after what you did to my career? This ceremony ends today, even if I have to burn this entire venue to the ground." The wedding hall went absolutely freezing cold. Julian had spent the last 2 months launching a calculated, vicious psychological campaign to break my spirit, fully believing he held the ultimate blackmail material to destroy my reputation and ruin my new marriage. He thought his wealth, his high society connections, and his aggressive threats had successfully backed me into a corner. What his blind, vengeful arrogance completely blocked him from seeing was that I wasn't the weak, frightened girl he used to manipulate. I had anticipated his final desperate move weeks ago. As the police officers drew their handcuffs, a cold, sharp, and intensely victorious focus settled into my chest. Julian thought the police were here to arrest my groom. He had no idea I was the one who called them, and they were here for him. To understand how my beautiful wedding day turned into a high-stakes police operation, you have to understand the toxic trap of my past relationship with Julian. My name is Clara. For 5 years, I worked as the senior architectural director at Julian's luxury development firm. I didn't just work there. I poured my soul, my sleepless nights, and my unique structural designs into building his corporate empire from a local agency into a multi-million-dollar brand. Julian was a brilliant but deeply narcissistic man who treated me less like a partner and more like his most valuable corporate asset. He constantly told me that without his family wealth and social status, my designs were completely worthless. For years, I stayed, blinded by his empty promises of a shared future and a ring that felt more like a golden handcuff. But the breaking point arrived when I discovered that Julian had been systematically stealing credit for my green energy patents, while quietly filtering corporate funds into offshore accounts under my digital signature to frame me if the project ever failed. When I confronted him with the evidence, he didn't apologize. He laughed in my face, telling me that high society circles would always believe a millionaire tycoon over a common working designer. That was the night I packed my things, resigned from his firm, and walked out of his toxic cage forever, taking my authentic talent with me. Leaving Julian was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it opened the door to the genuine life I actually deserved. A year after my escape, I met David. David wasn't a billionaire tycoon trying to buy the world. He was a dedicated, incredibly warm-hearted pediatric surgeon who respected my ambition, supported my independent design agency, and loved me for exactly who I was. With David, I didn't have to walk on eggshells or hide my achievements. When he proposed to me on a quiet beach at sunset, I felt a level of safety and pure happiness I hadn't known in a lifetime. But a narcissist like Julian cannot handle losing control. When news of our engagement hit the local high society newsletters, Julian's professional success turned into an absolute obsession with revenge. He couldn't stand the fact that I had built a highly successful independent firm without him, and he despised seeing me genuinely happy with a man who truly valued me. Julian began leaving threatening voicemails at my office, stalking my social media feeds, and quietly reaching out to our wedding vendors. He tried to bribe our caterers to cancel our contracts, sent anonymous defamatory letters to David's hospital board, and vowed that he would personally ensure my wedding day became a public horror story. The psychological war had begun, but David held my hand through every single threat, promising that we would face his darkness together. The true escalation exploded exactly 1 week before our ceremony. I was working late at my design studio when a courier delivered a heavy, unlabeled black envelope directly to my desk. Inside was a collection of printed financial documents, heavily manipulated digital chat logs, and a fabricated corporate audit report from Julian's firm. It falsely claimed that during my time as his director, I had embezzled over $800,000 from his corporate development accounts. Tucked behind the fraudulent documents was a handwritten note from Julian that read, "Sign over your green energy patent rights to my firm by Friday, Clara, or I will hand this packet to the Federal Fraud Division on your wedding morning. Let's see how much your doctor husband loves you when you're standing at the altar in handcuffs." My hands shook with a sudden, freezing panic as I read his elaborate lies. He had spent months using high-priced forensic hackers to fabricate a digital paper trail designed to completely ruin my career and destroy my future. But as I stared at the fake signatures, I remembered something Julian always forgot. I was an architectural engineer. I kept detailed, physical, handwritten logs of every single project transaction, time-stamped and dual-signed by independent site managers. I didn't panic. I dialed the number of a senior investigator at the Financial Crimes Division, laid the documents out under my desk lamp, and quietly set a counter-trap that Julian would never see coming. The morning of our wedding arrived with a breathtaking, clear summer sky that illuminated the vibrant, blooming white roses of the luxury botanical garden pavilion. The air was filled with the sweet scent of jasmine and the melodic, peaceful harmony of a live string quartet as I walked down the long, ivory-carpeted aisle. David stood at the altar, looking at me with tears of pure devotion in his eyes, his smile radiant in a sharp black tuxedo. As we held hands and began reciting our vows, the weight of the past year completely lifted from my shoulders. For a moment, the world was perfectly beautiful, and Julian's threats felt like a distant, powerless memory. But a narcissist's malice never rests. Just as David was preparing to place the gold band onto my finger, the heavy glass doors at the back of the pavilion were violently slammed open. The string music instantly cut out into a chaotic, terrifying silence as Julian marched down the center aisle. He was wearing an expensive luxury tuxedo, but his tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and he held a half-empty glass of champagne in his hand. He looked completely unhinged, his face twisting into a mask of pure, malicious triumph as he shouted for everyone to hear, "Stop this pathetic circus right now! This wedding is a complete fraud, and this woman is a common corporate thief!" The entire pavilion erupted into a wave of horrified gasps and panicked whispers. My bridesmaid stepped back in shock, and David instantly moved in front of me, his physical posture turning into a protective shield as he stared Julian down with a deep, defensive anger. But Julian didn't look at David. His venomous eyes were locked entirely on me. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a duplicate copy of the fabricated fraud packet, and threw the papers into the air, letting them scatter across the white carpeted aisle like a shower of toxic confetti. "Look at your beautiful bride, David," Julian sneered loudly, his voice echoing off the high glass ceilings. "She's an embezzler who stole millions from my firm to fund her independent agency. I've already submitted the digital files to the state police department, and the fraud units are on their way to arrest her right now. Your perfect little high society marriage is over before it even started, Clara. I told you that if you left me, I would ensure you were left with absolutely nothing." Victoria's elite friends and the country club guests in the crowd leaned forward, their faces filled with judgmental shock as they began reading the scattered financial sheets. Julian stood there, his shoulders thrown back, fully expecting me to break down into floods of tears, cover my face in deep humiliation, and run out of the pavilion in total defeat. He wanted to see me broken right in front of my new family. Instead of crying or running away, I slowly stepped out from behind David's protective form. I looked down at the fraudulent corporate logs scattered at my feet, and then I looked back up at Julian. I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. Instead, I let out a quiet, intensely confident laugh that completely stopped Julian's triumphant rant in its tracks. The calm serenity on my face made his unhinged smile instantly freeze, a sudden, subtle hint of nervousness flickering in his eyes. "You really haven't changed at all, Julian," I said, my voice dropping into a clear, steady tone that carried perfectly over the venue's microphone system. "You always thought your wealth made you completely invisible to the law. You truly believed that because you fabricated a digital paper trail, your corporate crimes would just disappear." Before Julian could answer, the heavy double doors of the pavilion opened once again. But this time, it wasn't a wedding guest. Two high-ranking, plainclothes detective investigators from the State Financial Crimes Division stepped into the hall, followed by 4 uniformed police officers. Julian let out a short, arrogant laugh, pointing his finger directly at me. "Perfect timing, officers. There she is. Arrest her for the corporate embezzlement of my development funds." The lead detective didn't even look at me. He walked straight past my table, pulled an official red-stamped warrant from his coat, and stopped directly in front of a horrified Julian. "Julian Vance," the lead detective announced clearly, his voice cutting through the silent room like a blade. "We are here today to execute a felony arrest warrant issued by the state Supreme Court. You are being charged with multi-million-dollar corporate bank fraud, deliberate systemic forgery, identity theft, and filing a fraudulent police report with fabricated evidence." Julian's face went a sudden, ghostly shade of ash white, his champagne glass slipping from his fingers and shattering against the marble floorboards with a loud crash. "What? No! You have the wrong person! She's the thief! I have the digital logs right here!" Julian stammered, his voice dropping into a high-pitched, pathetic panic as sweat poured down his face. "We reviewed your digital logs, Mr. Vance," the detective countered coldly. "And we also reviewed the physical, independent project transaction ledgers that Ms. Miller submitted to our division last Tuesday. Your digital files are a complete fabrication. Our forensic unit spent the night auditing your offshore accounts, and we found the exact tracking numbers showing you transferred the stolen funds yourself to frame your director. Turn around and place your hands behind your back immediately." The entire wedding crowd watched in absolute roaring shock as the uniformed officers stepped forward, grabbed Julian's arms, and slapped heavy silver handcuffs around his wrists. The bitter millionaire who came to destroy my life was completely crushed under the weight of his own criminal arrogance. As the police officers aggressively dragged a shouting, weeping Julian out of the botanical pavilion and into the back of a flashing police cruiser, the heavy, toxic cloud that had hung over my life for years completely vanished. The high society guests who had doubted me stood up, breaking into a loud, roaring standing ovation that filled the grand glass hall. I turned back to David at the altar. The violins began to play once again, sweeter and more beautiful than ever before. David looked at me with an absolute, profound pride in his eyes, took my hand, and placed the gold ring onto my finger. Our kiss wasn't just a celebration of marriage. It was a celebration of total, unbending freedom. The fallout from Julian's public arrest moved with a swift, beautiful justice. Within 48 hours, the state banking authorities froze his corporate assets, his development firm filed for immediate bankruptcy, and his high society board members forced him out of the legacy empire entirely. The bitter ex who tried to make me an outcast was now facing a 10-year federal prison sentence. 2 weeks after the wedding, I walked into the grand opening of my brand new independent architectural firm, dressed as a true leader. I was no longer a shadow director working for a narcissist. I was the absolute owner of my destiny, building sustainable structures that would outlast his broken name forever. As I stand by the large glass windows of my design firm today, watching the city skyline glow in the warm golden hour sunset, a deep, beautiful reflection settles into my heart. Our modern world is often filled with bitter, entitled individuals like Julian, people who believe that their wealth, their titles, or their digital manipulations give them the right to treat others like property, sabotage relationships, and destroy anyone who dares to walk away from their control. They think that power lies in the lies they can publish online and the threats they can whisper in the dark. But this intense journey taught me the ultimate moral lesson of human life. A career, a marriage, and a true sense of personal worth cannot be bought with an inheritance or sustained by narcissistic greed. True success and unshakable dignity aren't found in the vanity of a high society name. They are forged in the fires of character, honesty, hard work, and the courage to stand up for the truth. Julian tried to launch a public execution of my character on the happiest day of my life, but in his blind malice, he forgot that a woman who builds her own worth can never be torn down by a fraud. When you stay true to your integrity and keep your receipts, the elaborate traps of the deceptive will always trap them instead. If you believe that honesty, hard work, and true love will always triumph over toxic narcissism and revenge, please hit the like button, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, cinematic stories of emotional justice. Thank you for watching, and remember, never let an old cage stop you from building your new empire.